Today on this episode of The Brain Surgeon's Take, we will be discussing how to spot a psychopath with clinical and forensic neuropsychologist, as well as mental health expert witness, Dr. Michael Collins. Get a professional's insight into psychopathy, how it manifests socially, and what the telltale signs are for identifying these potentially dangerous individuals. Much more on this podcast episode. Welcome back, everyone. Here's my take on Dr. Michael Collins. He is a leading clinical and forensic neuropsychologist who has analyzed some of the most extreme psychopaths in the state of Florida. His work is truly fascinating, as it entails diving deep into the roots of psychotic behavior in an effort to effectively diagnose and treat these ill patients. What I enjoyed most about this podcast was learning about the different types and degrees of psychopathy that exist. Not every psychopath is a serial killer. Most, in fact, live relatively normal lives and come into contact with us daily. So how do we identify these people with psychopathic tendencies? What are the red flags or telltale signs that someone is a psychopath? It's important to answer these questions, as prolonged interactions with these individuals can be toxic and frankly dangerous. Listen up as we discuss how to spot a psychopath. Check it out. Hey, Michael, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right. I'm excited to have you on the podcast today to talk about the crazies that are all around us, and you deal with it every day as a professional. But want to get your insight on such a critical topic on how to spot a psychopath.
Well, hey, I'm going to do my best.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think that your experience on a professional level as a clinical neuropsychologist who does a lot of this work, especially in the legal arena, is going to open up a lot of insight into this. So, I guess let's start with the first question, which is, what is the definition of a psychopath? We use that term often, but maybe not appropriately. What is the definition of a psychopath?
Well, there's kind of a lot of buzzwords that surround the term psychopath. I guess I'll just start off by saying is psychopath is really short for a term that we use called psychopathy that we use to identify in these individuals. And a lot of times what we're really kind of trying to figure out is, are these individuals that have true mental illness, or are these individuals that kind of have these disruptive behavioral patterns that are more personality based as opposed to something that's more biological with regards to mental illness. So psychopath is short for psychopathy, just to kind of put that out there. So when we talk about individuals that are a psychopath, we talk about people that not so much mentally ill, but these are really more instinctive behaviors that the individual has. A lack of empathy, a lack of genuineness, really trouble establishing social emotional relationships with, it could be family members, it could be individuals in the community, it could be individuals within work and education. These are people that really kind of have a disconnect between pro-social behavior and their own individual selfish needs, so to speak. That's really kind of the best way I'd summarize it.
And in your experience, would you say psychopaths are born that way, or it's created by the environment, or most likely a combination of the two?
We can kind of go on and on and on with nature, nurture, with regards to this. It really, it really seems to be the environment in which that they have been raised in. Now, that being said, there may be other individuals in the family, so there could be some type of biological connections there as well. But a lot of times you'll see these individuals raised in environments that are chaotic, abusive, disruptive, and those patterns carry on into adulthood.
Do you see it often running in families?
So the best example I can give you is when I work with individuals that say have a very lengthy law enforcement record. It would not be uncommon for, say, the father or for the mother or for somebody else in the family to also have that extensive law enforcement history where they've been arrested, they've been incarcerated, perhaps institutionalized in some ways. The pattern kind of goes on itself, and that behavior that they've been exposed to kind of becomes a way of life for them into their own adulthood.
The other question is, how common is this? I read a stat saying that 1 in 100 people, 1% of the population, are psychopaths. Is that true or is that inaccurate?
Um, so, with regards to that, the statistics will tell you somewhere between what you said, around 1%, as high as 2%. Just to kind of put that into context, a condition like schizophrenia is about 1%. A condition like bipolar disorder is somewhere between 2.5%. So, a psychopath technically kind of somewhere in that range between um, 1 and 2. Now, the problem with just classifying it is this is not a condition that's diagnosed in any of the diagnostic manuals that you or I use. You're not going to see this in the ICD. You're not going to see this in the DSM. This is really a condition that is really kind of manufactured within the professional community to classify this group of people that are doing these behaviors that are disruptive to society. So the statistics are probably even a little shakier than the ones that we deal with the conditions that we treat on an everyday basis.
Now, you just touched base on that. I guess someone listening could say, well, why are these people dangerous to society? Why do we care about identifying psychopaths? Give us some examples as to why psychopaths are dangerous to our overall society.
Well, we have about I apologize. We have about 50 correctional institutions here in the state of Florida, and every single one of them is at near capacity. And a number of the individuals, that's going to be the highest prevalence or the highest prevalence rate of where you're going to find individuals that you'd be classified as being a psychopath. So, out of just the sheer fear and knowledge of individuals that end up being incarcerated, that should tell you why there's concern about being able to, identify these people, being able to, understand why they do what they do, and for yourself as a person, not just identifying it, but having appropriate boundaries when you're interacting with individuals that show some of these symptoms.
And would you say that the prevalence is rising, or would you, over the time that you've been in this field, have you seen it more frequently diagnosed?
So again, you don't really see it diagnosed. You'll see other conditions, that are typically kind of diagnosed. You'll see maybe an antisocial personality disorder or some other personality disorder with these, psychopathic traits, so to speak. But you won't see somebody just diagnosed as being a psychopath. This is really kind of more of a media term, a term that's kind of used in the general in the amongst the general population to classify this group of people.
So let's get into how to spot a psychopath, how the general public can identify someone who might be along the lines of psychopathy. And I looked up, there's basically 10 frequently cited traits that are seen often in these individuals. I'm going to go over each of them, and I want you, with your experience, to either agree, disagree, and give examples of such. So number one, and you mentioned it earlier, lack of empathy.
So lack of empathy is just really kind of a lack of desire or not wanting to connect with an individual, put yourself in their shoes, um, not showing any remorse, so to speak. So, for example, if somebody's say, grieving the loss of, like a loved one, so to speak, they're not going to really identify with the emotions, show the nurturing characteristics that an average person would, with just showing some empathy towards how they're struggling with like a difficult emotional time. So, an individual that's classified as a psychopath, they're not going to really be able to make that connection or really necessarily want to make that connection with an individual because their behaviors tend to be a lot more self-serving, um, kind of geared towards what's in it for them, what helps them now.
And the example you gave would be someone grieving the loss of a loved one, someone in their family, and that psychopath wouldn't show empathy for that person's loss.
Yeah, it could be that that would be an example. Also, just not showing remorse for maybe something they've done wrong. These tend to be some of the characteristics that they show that are we classify as being different or aberrant toward what a normal emotional response would be.
The next trait that I saw frequently cited, constant lying, and not little white lies, but just what I'm reading is lying as your way of life. Is that correct?
That's correct, and I think that kind of speaks for itself. It could be a combination of smaller white lies. It could also be bigger lies. It can also be exhibiting a behavior that we have kind of heard about a lot lately, and that's like gaslighting. An individual, somebody accuses you of something, and they just kind of turn right back around, and they're like kind of like peppering you with accusations and whatnot to kind of deflect it off them and back onto like another person, be it true or not.
And it's not lying for a purpose. It's just lying as a way of life. Basically, they almost don't want to tell the truth, even if the truth won't hurt them.
Well, I think that I think that that's true, but I also think that it is self-serving for the narrative to be in their favor.
The next one that I thought was interesting, I hadn't really thought about it, but I've definitely seen it before. People who are constantly stirring the pot and causing drama don't like the idea of harmony. And I've been reading that psychopaths essentially are uncomfortable when things are harmonious and that they like stirring the pot. They like causing chaos. Is that something you've seen?
What happens is their behavior tends to kind of suck people in that are around them, that kind of get them into these situations where they're kind of having to deal with the the drama, the mistakes, the poor decisions that they make, and so there can be kind of like a constant state of conflict and chaos in their life, and it spreads to the people that are kind of around them, trying to help them, um, family members, friends, significant others, so on. So it's really kind of that people get sucked in that are around them. Situations may start off, pretty good. It's just over time, the deceptive behavior, the lying, their inability to connect to people, it tends to just kind of fail the situations around them, and the people that have been there, again, they get sucked into it.
Do you have an example of that our listeners might connect with or might associate with that you've seen of a psychopath causing that chaos surrounding him or her?
I think the best example that I could provide you with is maybe just an individual that, if they're not getting what they want out of one situation, or maybe from one person, they'll kind of bring in another person to try to create some type of conflict or some type of disagreement with regards to how that situation is initially kind of being set up. So I guess the best way I could describe that would be is if you go one place and you're told no, but if you go somewhere else and you're told yes, maybe if you're dealing with maybe like a juvenile that's starting to exhibit psychopathic traits, maybe they're really kind of more in that defiant 15, 16, 17-year old range. And let's say you're dealing with like a complex situation like divorced parents, and this kid's already starting to get in trouble, and they go to dad, and the dad is like, no, absolutely not. We're not going to be doing this. Well, then we go to mom, and mom maybe is a little bit more agreeable, a little bit more enabling, and she kind of gets coerced, into the situation. Well, now this person has kind of got an ally, and they've kind of triangulated against the father here. But let's not forget who where who the culprit is here in this whole situation. And so now this individual is kind of starting to get what they want, and they've also kind of divided and conquered here with the parents, with that relationship kind of maybe further deteriorating, more disagreement. But they kind of identify the fact that, all right, these are two people that probably don't agree very well in the first place. I can kind of triangulate the situation to get what I want. That would be like probably the most basic example I can give you, and that's just a really common one that could translate into the workplace, friendships, as well as just the example that I gave you.
Yeah, that's very easy for everyone to understand how that activity would cause a lot of chaos, unnecessary chaos. The next trait, zero guilt, kind of ties into the lack of empathy, but maybe a little bit different in the sense that no remorse for their own actions, right? Like we all make mistakes. The usual response is to feel remorse, feel guilty for making a mistake. But what do you see with these psychopaths? They have zero guilt when they make a mistake, when something goes wrong.
Yeah, and I'll try to give a little bit more context to that. Not just so much the zero guilt, but if they say sorry, they likely don't really mean it. And if they do say sorry, it's just kind of to get themselves out of the jam of the immediate situation. It doesn't mean that they're not going to go do it again. They might just say sorry to get out of the conflict right now, but that doesn't mean they learned anything from it, and it's not going to stop them going right back into it.
I'm trying to think about an example for our listeners. Like, I mean, would it have to be a major situation or just on the daily, constantly when things go wrong? Hey, I'm sorry, but not really caring.
It's really the I'm sorry and I'm not really caring. Let's just say, for example, you borrow something and you break it, and you really weren't supposed to. I shouldn't say borrow. Let's say you took something and you break it, and now you're caught. I think most people, the average person, would feel bad both for the fact that they did something deceptive to begin with, and now they've broken it. Their intention should be to how do I repay this person? Some of the psychopath may say they're sorry, may say they're going to do it, but that's just to kind of get out of the situation. Their intention is really not to go back and rectify anything.
Next trait I thought was interesting, and I guess we've all seen it from time to time, but highly aggressive when angry. Meaning, we all get angry. There's always situations that maybe we don't agree with, but I guess a psychopath has a tendency to become highly aggressive when they're in those situations.
Yes, and that aggressiveness stems from their defensiveness about their own actions, their own behaviors, their own beliefs about the situation. Just think about any high conflict relationship where things have the propensity to escalate very fast, and things escalate very fast because there's a history around it. This is not just a one-off situation. This is a road they've been down many times before. So it's kind of like the switch gets thrown, the situation is activated, and they kind of go from like 0 to 100 relatively fast.
And is this where violence can sometimes come into it? Is this where, when people think of psychopaths, they think of potentially these people becoming serial killers? Is this where the violence comes into play?
Certainly, this would be, lay some of the groundwork for violence. But let's just take, for example, maybe like a situation in a relationship where there's domestic violence in the relationship, and individuals that are psychopaths are they can be charming, they can be intelligent, they can be very aware of their appearance, maybe put a lot of work into themselves, put a lot of effort into looking good. So, on the surface, things look very good. And they will use that charm and those superficial tendencies to kind of draw people in. So if you think about like, dating, for example, they will use that charm to draw people in. And over time, um, that genuineness you know, becomes a little bit more transparent. So this person that you thought you met that was, Prince Charming and great, over time this dissolves, and now you have this individual that is, a loose cannon, aggressive. They're no longer kind of putting that mask on to like draw you in. They've already drawn you in. They've already kind of taken control of the situation, and now they're behaving as though they naturally would.
And you mentioned it, superficially charming, which was the next trait that I had read a lot about. And I think that's important to maybe focus on one more time, in the sense that it's often the case where psychopaths on the outside, when you first meet them, appear unassuming, and they're not threatening. They don't put you on edge, and that at first they are very charming and they can be charismatic, and that's part of how they draw in people into their circle. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. These are going to be individuals that are going to be really hard to spot in society in general, which is why looking at some of the behaviors and getting to know them become more important as opposed to just what their general appearance is.
The other trait that I saw was that psychopaths take serious and uncalculated risks. And if you read that, you're like, well, risks can be good, and I think we would both agree that we all take risks. They're usually very calculated, and it's high reward. And we all take risks, and there can be benefits, but they have to be very well thought out. Would you say that psychopaths take serious risks without really calculating?
Yeah, and the way that I would kind of draw that back from just say like a neuroscience perspective is, these are characteristics of individuals that have poor frontal lobe functioning. So that execution of behavior, that thoughtfulness that goes, into methodically setting something up, um, the ability to both create a response and also withhold a response. These are all characteristics of that are of executive functioning, housed in the frontal lobe, and so you can really kind of argue that these are individuals that have a very juvenile way of looking at behaviors in relation to risk taking, um, planning, you know, setting up steps and thinking through a situation. They're kind of looking at that immediate gratification, that immediate, response that they're going to get. They don't play the tape through. They don't look into, what are all the consequences that are at risk for me doing these behaviors. They see what they want and they're zeroed in on going after it.
Which ties into what you said before: zero guilt, no empathy. So you're going to make decisions. You're not going to care if you hurt other people, and you're not really going to care about the consequences. And oh, if something happens wrong, I don't really care. So it's all part of the same trait. The other one, which ties into the charming part, which we talked about earlier, was I read that psychopaths tend to be narcissistic to an extreme, meaning that it's all about themselves, correct?
Correct. And to tie that back to, just being it more of a kind of like a personality dysfunction, narcissistic personality disorder, a diagnosable condition in the DSM. There are certainly characteristics in a psychopath that talk about inflated ego, inflated sense of self, being incredibly selfish people, um, feeling that they're kind of above the people that are around them. So those characteristics of narcissism, carry over into, the profile that we would create for somebody that's a psychopath.
The second to last trait that I was reading about, which ties into what you were saying before, as you can see, a lot of these traits are just different ways that they manifest, but impulsive decision making. And this goes back to the risk taking without really calculating what the risk is. When there's a decision to be made, there's very little thought process behind it. It's they either go or they don't go. Is that correct?
Yeah, and to elaborate on it, they're seeking out the immediate gratification, what we talked about just a minute ago too. Again, a frontal lobe function. They are looking for the gratification right now. They are not looking for the delayed gratification. They're not looking for they are not looking forward to being on, the journey to accomplishing something. They're looking to have whatever their needs are met, right
Do you have an example of that off the top of your head that might put it together for our listeners?
now. I would say probably the most common example that I would see in the people that I deal with would be, how they get money, going after maybe stealing it as opposed to maybe, saving money, doing extra things at work that would allow you to make more money, making excuses why they would need to borrow money from somebody, whatever that would kind of get them to the place that they want right now, and not having to exhibit any more suffering on their end, what they would perceive as suffering. They're going to make they're going to make things. I don't want to say it. They're going to do what they have to do right now in order to get what they want. And if it hurts other people, too bad.
And then the last trait, which sums up everything basically, uh, no sense of responsibility. I mean, we all get up in the morning and we have responsibilities, whether it's work, family, personal, professional, socially. And psychopaths have no sense of responsibility, purpose, who they're taking care of, what they have to do that day. Is that accurate?
Right? There would for something that they did wrong that hurt somebody else, there would tend to be a lot of excuses that were surrounding the behavior, and they would not take responsibility for anything that they did to cause harm to another person or another situation. So that would really be the best way to kind of describe that, is that they would, while not taking responsibility, there's excuses, there's reasons to kind of justify their behavior, and what happened to these people or to this situation are just unintended consequences.
Now, you as a mental health professional and neuropsychologist, how often do you interact? Not at work, because obviously these are people who you take care of all the time. But how often do you run into people who you think might be psychopaths?
So clearly in my work settings, I probably
Yeah.
work in the settings that would have the highest prevalence rates of individuals that are psychopaths. Um, I would say that in just my everyday my everyday life and working and whatnot, most of the people that I'm interacting with are in the legal profession. They're either people like myself that are mental health professionals, or attorneys, judges, people in business, so on. There are certainly some tendencies I've seen in some attorneys that I've worked with, over the years, where I've seen some very um, audacious behavior. I thought very self-serving, to say the least. Not common, but I've certainly seen some characteristics from individuals. And the perfect example is I'm brought in as an expert witness. So as an expert witness, I'm supposed to come in and I'm supposed to, provide information to the court that only somebody like myself has the ability to do. And I'm supposed to be as neutral as I can be. So it's very rare that I would have results that would just be overwhelmingly helpful to one side and not the other side. There's usually some pros and cons to a lot of the information that I'm relaying to the court for both sides, and both attorneys are kind of massaging that information, in their favor to try to help themselves out in the case. But I've had people, when I've submitted reports, that if there's any flaws, like they're coming after me about it, and they're not happy about it. Although the case is overwhelmingly in their favor, the fact that it's not perfect and it's not exactly how they want it, they will use a lot of tactics to try to get you to change your opinion, adjust information in your report, and so on. So I would say that those are probably the most common psychopathic behaviors that I see in my profession. Like I said, the overwhelming majority of the people I work with are professional, and even if they don't like my results, they can take it and they can go forward. But I've had situations where people you know have really kind of been upset over minor details because it's not exactly how they want it. It doesn't fit their narrative, and they will behave a little audaciously about it.
I mean, it's clear that these psychopaths exist, that it's more common than we think, and that all of us are gonna interact with people who are psychopaths. And I think we have gone over what the critical traits are to look out for when you interact with someone. And then the final question would be, if our listeners interact with someone and they all these traits are fitting in and someone is a psychopath, what should our listeners do if and when they spot a psychopath?
I feel like this is turning into like a dating guide for individuals here in South Florida. So that being said, I would say that some of the things that you should look for that should be concerning is, I kind of, a lot of it goes back to kind of like the relationship perspective that I had given. But individuals that have very poor boundaries, people that are, manipulative. And so when I say poor boundaries, individuals that kind of want to go from like, A to Z, really, really, really fast. Individuals that are manipulative, people that are constantly, borrowing, money and not paying it back, people that are, taking things, that are not theirs and not giving them back. So, in terms of just identifying these characteristic out, in the wild, so to speak, I think that a lot of it really kind of centers around people that are trying to take advantage of the people that are around them. And they usually have patterns of it, because what will happen is once one of these people has kind of made themselves way through a group, you kind of find out that this is something that has happened in this situation before, and that situation before. And with social media, you'll hear about this with these influencers, so to speak. And these people come out, they're giving all this advice, and they're sucking people in, and they have subscription services. And then all of a sudden you find out that these people are dating the members of the group, and they're in relationships, and then all of a sudden they're engaged, and all of a sudden like a month later they're not, and now they're doing something else, and now they have a whole nother subspecialty that they're into. There's no vetting, there's no certifications, there's no licensure. It's just social media gives people a platform where they can kind of go on and say whatever they want, because it's not really regulated in any way. You think about my profession, for example, with just the amount of people that are self help gurus out there right now with no training at all, but they have the ability to jump on their computer, grab a microphone. They can even grab a white coat like you and I have and throw it on, and they can sit there and take questions from individuals that don't know any better. And there's a lot of risk at doing that. And do they care about the risk? Do they care about that harm that they could be providing to other people? No, not really, because they want to be the person that's sitting behind the camera with the white coat on, handing out advice to individuals.
Yeah, I mean, social media, internet's a whole another podcast about how that has enabled people, and I think it has played a huge role in the dramatic rise of mental health illness in this country and around the world. I think social media and internet has a large role in that escalating rate of mental health. But listen, Michael, thank you for an amazing podcast. I think that what we've learned today is that, as I just mentioned, mental health is critical. It needs to be more emphasized. People do not pay enough attention on mental health because the rates are skyrocketing. And then, particularly when it comes to psychopaths, which is obviously a very high degree of mental illness, I think that people need to know those traits that we went over and how to identify psychopaths, because they can be so disruptive and so dangerous to so many people. And when you identify someone as having those traits, you obviously want to distance yourself. And so I think having that awareness really, really will help a lot of our listeners. And I appreciate your time today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, buddy. Have a great weekend.
Take care.